Here we have this video. We just watched one of her videos. Let's watch this other one. This is Flat Earth Science, Wrong But Not Stupid by Sabine Hossenfelder.
I, as many people in science communication, am fascinated with flat earthers. Here you have a group of people steadfastly rejecting evidence that's right in their face. Today I want to tell you why I nevertheless think flat earthers are neither stupid nor anti-scientific, most of them anyway. More importantly, I also want to explain why you should not be embarrassed if you can't remember how we know that the Earth is round.
And that's an interesting
angle. But first I have to tell you what flat earthers actually believe and how they got there.
I like her approach, because she had this approach in the previous video as well. I need to refill my water bottle. How just because you're not an expert doesn't mean you're stupid. Being ignorant and being stupid are two separate things. And a lot of people will conflate that, especially the elites nowadays in academia. If you're not an expert, therefore you're too stupid. It's not that you're not informed enough, it's that you're too stupid, that you lack the capacity to ask the questions instead of you lack the information to ask the right questions. They're fucking stupid, the Earth is round, and she just said that they might not be. So let's hear her points. Let's hear her out, because that's a very interesting point to make right off the bat, the first 30 seconds. So
the most popular flat Earth model is that of a disk where the North Pole is in the middle and the South Pole is an ice wall on the edge of the disk.
Lovely.
But not all flat Earthers sign up to this. An alternative is the so-called bipolar model, where both poles are on the disk, surrounded by water that's held by a rim of something, maybe ice or rocks.
Okay.
And a minority of flat earthers believe that Earth is really an infinite plane. They mostly agree, though, that gravity does not exist, and that the observations we normally attribute to gravity come instead from the upward acceleration of the flat Earth.
Upward?
As a consequence, the apparent gravitational acceleration is the same everywhere on Earth. I explained some weeks ago that this is in conflict with evidence. We know that the gravitational acceleration is most definitely not the same everywhere on Earth.
Oh my god, that's... I knew of flat earthers. I never really saw their models or anything. Problem is that most flat earthers are given evidence, often in a very easy to understand way, and they don't change their mind. Yeah, they reject evidence on principle, and they refuse to entertain it, which is a different... that is an unwise thing to do. So, yeah, let's see how she addresses this. Because she's a physicist.
The idea that gravity is due to upward acceleration also causes other problems.
Yeah, flat earther?
For example, you have to assume that the moon and the sun...
Brother, I come from Guatemala and I traveled to Europe. I come from a mountainous place that has beaches. I've seen the curvature of Earth with my own eyes. I can't be a flat earther. I can't, because I've seen the roundness of Earth with my own eyes. I cannot and will not be a flat earther. It's not being uninformed, as being willfully ignorant, which is being stupid. Yeah, so let's see how she addresses it.
Accelerate along with the flat Earth, so we don't just run into them. That's an ad hoc assumption, which disfavors the flat Earth hypothesis against models where the orbits of the moon and the sun can be calculated from the gravitational law. But that's not the only problem. You also have to get the moon and the sun to somehow circle around over the disk to explain day and night and the phases of the moon. To get the day-night cycle to be noticeable, you have to shrink the sun and move it closer to the Earth. You also have to somehow get the radiation of the sun to be directional.
Like a lamp,
That's many more ad hoc assumptions. But even with those assumptions, the size of the sun will change during the day more than we observe.
What is wrong with being a YouTuber? Because I've learned a lot from YouTubers rather than from many of the teachers that I've had, so... Still, she's helping me understand why they believe what they believe and what it is that they believe. It's still, like, it's still nonsense, but it's still disprovable, easily disprovable. But it's fascinating that she's entertaining it, so let's see.
And no one has ever successfully predicted solar eclipses on a flat Earth or calculated the observed motions of the planets.
Yep.
The bottom line is, it's not easy to improve on today's scientific standard. It was for good reasons that the hypothesis of a flat Earth was abandoned more than 2,000 years ago. Some people suggested to me that flat earthers do not actually believe the Earth is flat. They are just mocking people who take scientific evidence on trust. And that
sounds like
let's
a
be honest,
faction.
is something we all do to some extent every now and then. And it is probably the case that some flat earthers are indeed just pretending.
I can see a faction of flat earthers, kind of like the initial faction of the Church of Satan in the U.S., which wasn't a satanic movement. It was an atheist movement, which aimed to mock the Christians, similar to the Flying Spaghetti Monster, the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster as well. So I can see how, in principle, some of the flat earther movements could be like that. Because don't forget, this is not just one monolith. This is going to be a bunch of splintered groups with all of them with their different theories and everything. Then it's just going to be a problem because most of your theories do not show the actual engineering scientific work, which is quite boring and filled with math and more practical skill, more beneficial to the person. Yeah, that is true. And then you will always have an Indian YouTuber with 12 subscribers that has the lesson that you need. So, the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster, it is a real religious organization that was created in protest to several states' religious preferential treatment to certain religious groups. And it was mainly people that were protesting people being allowed to wear certain things or not wear certain things for ID pictures. Because for ID, when you take a picture of your ID, it's, hair standing back, you don't wear anything in your face, ears visible, straight at the camera. But then they saw that some people would be allowed to wear a certain hat, or, the hijab in the case of Muslims, because they are required by their faith to do it. So a group of people made the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster, which they believe the Flying Spaghetti Monster created this world and all that. It's a very crazy theory, but the church mandates these people to wear colanders in their head. And under the religious preferential treatment, it got approved. That's what they proved with it. I don't think any group should get preferential treatment based on their religion. They should also not be discriminated on that basis either. Exactly. And that was part of the point of the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. That these laws were ridiculous because of that. So, yeah, I agree with that. So, yeah.
But I find it exceedingly implausible they are all just faking it. To begin with,
There's
they
no way
would
all
all
of them
have
are
to be
faking it, yeah.
excellent actors. Just look at some of the videos on YouTube. Also, they are putting quite some time and in some cases money behind their conviction.
Yeah.
And that's why most of them full well know coming out as flat earther will make others doubt their sanity.
Yeah.
All that
Just
makes it
religious
unlikely
religion and,
they are just in for the fun.
Hell yeah.
Now, you may want to
yeah.
discard flat earthers as conspiracy theorists, which some fraction of them arguably are. But I think that would be somewhat unfair to most of them. To understand why, it helps to have a look at the history of the Flat Earth Society.
All right, let's see what you got to say.
The Flat
here.
Earth Society goes back to an Englishman by name Samuel Rowbotham, who lived in the 19th century. He was a
What?
medical doctor who believed he had proved that the Earth is flat and then complained for the rest of his life that the supposed scientific authorities ignored him. He referred to his method as scepticism, after the Greek word sitio, to seek.
What? I'm an ordained priest in Judaism, got that shit for shits and giggles. Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Hell yeah, dude. Oh my god. I thought this was a newer thing. Holy shit. Zetetic astronomy. Earth, not a globe. 19th century.
By scepticism, he meant an extreme version of the philosophy of empiricism. Rowbotham's philosophy, which is still the philosophy of flat earthers today, is that if you want to understand nature, you should only rely on information from your own senses. You can, for example, read on the website of the Flat Earth Society. The world looks flat, the bottoms of clouds are flat, the movement of the sun. These are all examples of your senses telling you that we do not live on a spherical heliocentric world. This is using what's called an empirical approach, or an approach that relies on information from your senses.
Did this guy just not have depth perception? Did the flat earth movement originate from a guy who didn't know, he just didn't have a sense of depth perception? Because that sounds to me like he just did not have depth perception. For those of you who don't know, a lack of depth perception is what allows us to perceive things as three-dimensional. So, you know, it's what dictates that, yeah, I can see that, I understand that there's something behind my monitor and my mind comprehends it that way. That my monitor is not just a square, is that there's a shape behind it. Stuff like that. Reason why you need scientific consensus and stuff and peer reviews is because there has been a lot of stupid scientists with big degrees in the past and in the present. We just watched that. So, yeah.
That flat earthers insist on evidence from your own senses only really is key to understanding their problem. I will come back to this.
Yeah, this has been
but
so
first, let me tell you the rest of their history.
Oh, there's more.
After Rowbotham's death in 1884, the flat earth idea was carried forward by another British guy, Samuel Shenton, who once explained to a journalist, "No man knows the ultimate shape of the earth, but that portion we live on is definitely flat. No one will ever know what the whole complexity is like, I suppose, because it goes beyond his sphere of observation, investigation, and comprehension."
To be fair, this was before we developed rockets. And very early flight. So we didn't have the view from up there. And these are people, okay. So we went from a guy with no concept of depth perception to being carried over with a guy with no concept of scale. The flat earth was new. I didn't know it was so old. No, apparently it's well over, what? This would be about 150 years old? Shit, it's almost as old as my country. Earth was proven around 2,500 years ago. Yeah. Yeah, she mentioned it. Yeah, she mentioned it. I'm not arguing against it. I'm not arguing here. I'm just saying, we are seeing the history of this. And that's why they're discarding. Because a guy with no depth perception made a bunch of observations from his little view, deciding to discard everything else, including all the proof that we've had for thousands of years. And no, Earth was proven round that we know of 2,500 years ago. We don't know how far back that really goes. Chances are it goes farther back than that. Responding to be fair, we didn't have rockets. Yeah, no, I'm saying to disprove this guy right there and then. To disprove either of these guys. To be like that, because that is absolute proof. Like, ever since we developed the rocket, yeah, that's absolute proof. There's nothing else there. So, yeah, no, my point here is that we went from a guy with no depth perception to a guy with no concept of scaling. Because, yes, the curvature of the Earth on a football field is going to be you're not going to be able to perceive it because we are that small compared to it. It's like when they bring the example of the basketball. Like, oh, you can see it's, you can see it's round from here. Yeah, look at it from the perspective of an atom. They really have records of the first person who proved and recorded it, just a Greek guy in Egypt with 2 sticks. Even calculated the size of Earth based on that. That's so cool. That's so cool. So yeah, those are like, the thing is, those are very good models with evidence, and then it's extrapolated data. You know, you have this data which is true, like data that is real, and you have these studies and everything, and then you extrapolate against it, and then you have the people that went up. Because, you know, 2,500 years ago, the Egyptians didn't have the option to just go up and just see the Earth from orbit and see, oh yeah, look at that. It's a sphere. Cool. Like, that is, there's a difference between you making a bunch of complicated models, because that must have been a fairly complicated thing to achieve. Like, that must have taken a long time to develop and extrapolate data from that and then just go up. Can you imagine that guy was still alive? That would be hilarious. So yeah, let's continue.
Again, note the emphasis on personally collected evidence. In 1954, Shenton created the International Flat Earth Society. Few people cared. He died in 1971. After his death,
Nice.
the Flat Earth Society was taken over by the US-American Charles Johnson. But even
God.
after the advent of the internet, flat earthers did not attract much attention.
Yeah, because it
Johnson
wasn't until
died in
fairly
2001,
recently.
at which point the Flat Earth Society had 3,500 or so members.
Jesus Christ, that's about as big as the KKK.
The job then fell to another American, Daniel Shenton,
Few
who's
people
not
cared. Yeah,
related
so
to the
good.
earlier Shenton, but whose logic falls right in line. He said in an interview with The Guardian in 2010, "I don't think there is solid proof. I'm not intentionally being stubborn about it,
Yes,
but
you
I
are.
feel our senses tell us these things, and it would take an extraordinary level of evidence to counteract those. How many people have actually investigated it? Have you?"
Oh my God. Now we go from one guy with no sense of depth to one guy with no sense of scaling to one guy with no sense of either. Oh, this is great. I love this.
Shenton had the idea to set up a wiki page for the Flat Earth community. Still, no one cared. But in
Nice.
2016, everything changed.
Yeah, it was around the time that I
What
started
happened in
seeing more people pop up with
2016
that.
is that a few devout flat earthers put up videos here on YouTube. And that really got things going by way of recruiting new believers. These videos have meanwhile been watched by millions of people.
Damn.
And that had consequences. In a 2018 poll in the United States, 2% of the respondents said they believe the Earth is flat, while another 7% are not quite sure. Reliable numbers are hard to come by, but we are meanwhile probably talking about more than 10,000 people in the developed world who reject science that was settled by the Middle Ages.
Way before that, but that is fascinating. How many of those people do you think have no sense of depth perception or no sense of scaling? How many people? Because one way to test somebody's sense of scale is one with the basketball thing, and two is with a concept of problem scaling. 1%. So that's a very different thing. Because Flat Earth Society with members all around the globe. Yep. Yep, I love these. I love these. Those have to be the troll ones, though. Those have to be the troll, like the troll faction, because at this point it's splintered into several factions, but that one has to be the troll faction.
Let that sink in for a moment.
How
does someone end up rejecting something as scientifically well established as the fact that the Earth is round? There is not only one reason, of course. Some flat earthers find the idea is appealing for religious reasons. Others are of the crowd who think NASA is evil, space is a fake, and the moon landing didn't happen.
Yep.
But mostly it's because they think they are merely being rational skeptics. They have not themselves been able to prove the Earth is round, so they believe they are only reasonable when they request evidence. CNN, for example, reports from a Flat Earth conference. Like most of the speakers at the event CNN spoke to, he was convinced after he decided he couldn't prove the Earth's roundness. I want to leave aside here that, of course, you cannot strictly speaking prove any empirical fact. You can only prove mathematical identities. So more precisely, we should speak of seeking evidence that disfavors the hypothesis that the Earth is flat, of which there is plenty, starting with the historical evidence about how stellar constellations shift if you travel, how the length of shadows changes, to Newton's 1/r² force law, that is the law for a sphere, not a disk, not to mention Einstein and gravitational redshift and the perihelion precession of Mercury, and so on and so forth. The problem that flat earthers have is that they cannot do most of these observations themselves. So if you buy the idea that it's only your personally collected evidence that you should accept, then it seems you cannot refute the idea that the Earth is flat. And so flat earthers' philosophy forbids them to accept scientific fact.
How many flat earthers do you think are diagnosed with narcissism? That would be a fascinating study. Like, I would like to see a study of the percentage of flat earthers that have no depth perception, the percentage of flat earthers that have no sense of scaling, and the percentage of flat earthers that could be diagnosed with narcissism. That would be a fascinating thing, seeing the correlations there. In Poland in middle school, we went over how experiments that proven things we take as fact worked, and that is how we have no doubt about those. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of education around the world, because it's not just in the United States, fails, because that is the instilling of critical thinking. That instills critical thinking on the students, and it shows you how to experiment with these things, and it shows you how to look at evidence and how to handle a hypothesis. And in this case, the flat earthers seem to have it backwards, that when you have a hypothesis, the scientific method is therefore to prove the hypothesis instead of trying to disprove the hypothesis. And if you can't, therefore there you go. It combines with solipsism as well. Maybe. But I would like to see a study. I would like somebody to perform a study to bring in as many flat earthers as possible and see how many of them have no depth perception. So how many of them have a difficult time perceiving third dimension objects. How many people have no sense of scale or have a difficulty understanding a concept of scaling to a large scale, and how many are narcissists? That would be a fascinating thing to find. Love the video of that guy that was flat earther. Someone recommended him to a simple experiment to disprove that he didn't. He tried to convince the other flat earthers about it, but they just said he was brainwashed. Which one? Because the one I'm thinking of is the one where they had a couple of planks that were a couple of I think it was doors or something. It was 2 planks of wood with holes in them and the same height, and they were placed at a certain distance. And they would shine a light through one of them, and the other person would observe through the hole. So if the Earth is flat, then the light would shine right there. And if it wasn't, they wouldn't be able to see the light. And they would only be able to see the light if the guy shined the light above the wood. That's the one I know of. I think it was one of the most popular videos of flat earthers being proved wrong. Never met a flat earther IRL. You met flat earthers? I have not. I haven't met any flat earthers that I know of. Maybe someone, but the topic has never occurred. The topic has never come up. So yeah, I personally don't know any flat earthers. So yeah, there are many videos about these, like the flat earthers disproving themselves. So
needless to say, if you want to hold on to your convictions, it helps if you refuse to do observations that could speak against them.
Let me address that. Yeah, there's a big correlation between being a flat earther and believing most ridiculous conspiracies, because it's a lot of people that have the scientific method backwards, where you come to a conclusion and then you try to prove the hypothesis. You don't. The steps you take are not to disprove the hypothesis, but to try and just prove the hypothesis and dismissing everything else. So yeah, I can see that, yeah. Again, I would like to see those 3 elements and the correlations, not just with conspiracy-minded people, but with the other elements as well.
There are actually many ways to convince yourself that the Earth is round, which are not that technically difficult. Buy a telescope and try to explain the motions of the moons of Jupiter, for example. So, what's wrong with flat earthers' attitude?
Okay.
Isn't asking for evidence exactly what rational thinkers should do? Sure. Evidence is key to scientific progress, but flat earthers' philosophical approach, by which they reject certain types of evidence, is inconsistent and ultimately logically wrong.
And it's wrong on principle. They don't act on principle, because they can only accept the evidence that proves their hypothesis. They cannot accept anything else, so it's almost cult-like behavior.
See, The only evidence anyone ever has of anything is evidence you collect with your own senses, except, as Descartes pointed out, evidence of your own ability to think. But this is not relevant here. Relevant is that the distinction which flat earthers are trying to draw between different types of evidence does not exist. All evidence you have is sensory input. If you hear an explanation of someone else's experiment, if you read a paper laying out someone else's argument, that's your own sensory input. A distinction which does exist, however, is that some of our sensory input requires very little decoding, while some requires a lot. Flat earthers' problem is that they refuse to decode difficult sensory input.
Yep, there you go. Let me see here. The king of flat earthers killed himself launching himself 5,000 feet in a home made of rocket and parachute. Try and prove there is no curvature to the earth. Well then, welcome to Today Man. How you doing? Good to see you. There is no evidence that flat earthers have an ability to think. An ability to think thoroughly, I would say, to think things through. Which is sadly true for a lot of people. It's not just flat earthers. Like, a lot of people can't think things through. They're giving talking points and that's about it. Again, it's like she mentions the CNN reporter that couldn't disprove that the earth is flat, so they joined the people. Yeah. This is, yeah, I have a point to make after this, but yeah.
A good example for the need to decode sensory input by conscious thought are optical illusions. Your brain tries to interpret visual input in ways that sometimes gives a misleading result, as in this example.
I hate this one so much. Ugh. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. A and B are the same shade of gray. I hate it so much.
You almost certainly think square A is darker than square B. It is not. To understand your sensory input correctly, you need to draw on other information, in this case your knowledge about optical illusions. Your brain interprets this image as if it was a natural three-dimensional scene, and therefore calculates back to the original color of the squares, taking into account what appears to be a shadow. This is the wrong interpretation if you want to know the actual color of pixels on the screen. The lesson is, if you do not think about your sensory input, if you do not properly decode it, you arrive at the wrong conclusion. Flat earthers similarly arrive at the wrong conclusion by failing to decode evidence,
that's the illusion,
by simply ignoring a lot of evidence that their own senses deliver. This is evidence about how society and how science works. Whether we are scientists or not, we all constantly use this evidence to navigate life, and I'm sure flat earthers are no exception. Just consider going to the supermarket and buying canned soup. Do you have evidence that what's in the can is edible? Probably not. For one, the can's closed. And if you're anything like me, you probably have no idea how or where or by whom it was produced.
Soup store. You went to buy clothes at the soup store. If you know what I'm referencing, we can be friends.
Why then are you not afraid of eating canned soup? Isn't this entirely irrational? No, because you do have evidence that canned soup is edible. You know how the legal system in your country works. You know that there are regulations on what can be sold as food in a supermarket. You know that if what's in that can was harmful to you, then a lot of people along the food chain would be punished for their mistake, and they don't want that. Your trust in canned food is an entirely reasonable inference from evidence, evidence that you collected with your own senses, because what else could you possibly have collected it with? Now let's come back to flat earthers. Most of you don't have a physics degree, and chances are that after learning in school how we know the earth is round, you didn't think much about it ever again. By and large, you're probably confident it's correct because what you learned in school was plausible, and you know it is widely taught to children, and you know that your government strives to give children in your country a scientifically accurate education.
Yeah.
So you have good reason to think the knowledge you were taught is backed by solid scientific evidence. There is no appealing to authority here. You have totally yourself collected all this evidence about how society works.
And one thing to note about the appeal to authority fallacy, I think it was Asmagol who I saw said that. It is a fallacy only when the authority you are appealing to is irrelevant to the matter at hand. So, yes, if I am appealing to authority saying that physicists have physically proven, via physical, physics-based studies, that the Earth is flat, that is not an appeal to authority fallacy. That is just me stating that the authority at hand has carried out what the authority does. If I say that the Earth is round because the police told me to, the police told me it is, that's a different story. Galactic Neoblade, welcome to today, man. How you doing? Welcome to today. Good to see you, yes. To be fair, relative perception is important for what we are doing right now. Watching things on monitors, because we perceive the images on the monitors as movement while they are a group of stills that are just changing too fast for us to register them as still. That unless your PC is shit and your frame rate is below 20. Yes, how have you been? I have been fantastic. I turned 30 this week. We watched the Nintendo Direct. We did 3 Jam and Shreds this week, and we are reacting to some videos right now. This is the last one we're going to react. I don't think we're going to... no, we watch the Viva La Dirt League after that, and then we're going to play a game. So, thank you, Neoblade. Thank you. Yeah, I turned 30, so look at that. Look at that. All right, let's finish this. She's almost done.
You have also yourself collected lots of evidence that science works. Any airplane, any laptop, any pair of glasses is evidence that science works. It's evidence that the system works. It's evidence for how the whole world works. So if you cannot recall just what experiments demonstrate that the Earth is not flat, or if you cannot immediately figure out what's wrong with flat earthers' arguments, there's no shame in rejecting their claims, because your rejection is based on evidence, evidence that science works.
It's just the
What's
background.
wrong is that flat earthers claim they are leading a scientific argument.
You can tell she's real because she has all her fingers in one. She's got all her fingers in both hands, and they stay that way.
But there is no scientific argument about whether the Earth is flat. This argument was settled long ago.
That looks weird, yeah.
Instead, flat earthers' argument is about whether you should trust evidence that other people have collected before you. And it's an important argument because this trust is essential for society and science to progress. The only alternative we have is that each and every one of us has to start over from scratch with birth. You see, flat earthers would eventually figure out the Earth is round, but it might take them 1,000 years until they've reinvented modern science. This is why I think scientists should take flat earthers' philosophical problem seriously. It's a problem that any scientifically advanced society must address. It is not possible for each and every one of us to redo all experiments in the history of science. It therefore becomes increasingly important that scientists provide evidence for how science works, so that people who cannot follow the research itself can instead rely on evidence that the system produces correct and useful descriptions of nature.
That's why we have schools,
therefore, flat earthers are a warning sign that scientists should take seriously. The more difficult scientific experiments and arguments are to follow for non-experts, the more care you must take to explain how we lead those arguments. Thanks for hearing me out. See you next week.
There you have it. That was Flat Earth Science. Wrong but not stupid. She addresses the cultural issue. The issue is not the science. The issue is the culture of education, or a lack thereof. Because, public education in the United States has been horrible for a very long time. For a very long time. Now the Department of Education is gone, We'll see how things go. Yeah, and this coupled with the previous video we watched where she read out the email. Yeah, there's a big problem in this. These are big problems in the sciences. But yes, these are cultural issues, and you need to learn how to address them, lest you risk the cult of the uninformed to take over. And that is something you don't want. That is something. How many sci-fi stories have we seen of the people who don't believe in the thing that is being used, and they resort to going back to less advanced, to like more primitive as a result, because they don't know how things work? Yeah, I think she's wrong on one point, which is that we need to bring down science to explain the lowest common denominator. I don't believe we should, because that often oversimplifies things to the point that theory might be warped. Yeah, but those are not mutually exclusive, though. You can have scientists pushing incredibly complex theories, and at the same time, you can have other scientists simplifying those and making them easy to understand. I don't see how those two are mutually exclusive. And those are two ways to push science. Because in order for you to push more complex theories, if you can simplify them and make them easier to understand as fundamental concepts, that means the following generations and the following ones can use those fundamentals more easily to build more complex things from there. I see that. I see that as really good. You know, there's 90% of the flat earthers are actually Americans. Yeah. And again, I want a study that shows how many flat earthers lack depth perception. How many Americans? I'm almost using the terms interchangeably. How many flat earthers lack a concept of scaling, and how many flat earthers are narcissists? I'd argue we need to work on education, move lowest common denominator higher. People understand science more. That absolutely, and I think those three things can be true. I think those three things are achievable simultaneously. Because we are talking about three different institutions over there. Because it is the job of the scientists to further science, and at the same time, it is in the best interest of the scientists to simplify their theories so that they can use them as simpler building blocks to make to search more complex things from. That is a good thing. So it's not that you're dumbing down the science, it's that you're simplifying to make what is a otherwise hyper complex thing into something a little bit simpler, easier to understand so that you can build from it. And it is the job of the educators to take that and simplify it even more so that normal people, the layman and the student, can understand. Some fear about a polycom locked, yeah. You are underestimating the lowest common denominators because we already simplified things. What is the Einstein equation? Yeah, no. I am oversimplifying things, yeah. And I am saying that's the goal. That's the goal is to raise the rising tide lifts all ships, that kind of thing. Because yes, 100 years ago, you wouldn't be able to teach half of the things we take now for granted. Like right now, we are operating under our education right now operates under the assumption that a 4-year-old can read. To a basic degree, but can read. That a 10-year-old can read a book. Not that complex a book, but can read a book. 200 years ago, that would be not really that realistic. 500 years ago, you told someone that a kid that was not from a noble family, that was not from a hyper-rich family, that was not from a family of traders, that was just a random kid, 10-year-old, would be able to read. That would be unthinkable. We've progressed that far, and that's the point of these things, right? Yes, we push these things forward, we push these things up, and the lowest common denominator will be pushed upwards. It will come at a cost, but yeah. So yeah, there you go. That was this video. Really good, and she does address the issue. The issue is philosophical and cultural, not scientific. I don't know how much of this the scientists can solve, because, again, this is more of a cultural thing. I don't think there's anything a scientist can say to somebody with a philosophy that requires them to reject it. So, yeah. Really good video. I really like this girl. This woman. She, I don't think it's fair to call her a girl no more, but she's really good. She's very eloquent, but her points are really, really well made. So, yeah, good stuff.